meeting, we'll call on our great supporter and one of our Thomas Paine Award winners, Tom Walker. So, Tom, would you please introduce our wonderful speaker tonight?
Sure, I'd be glad to and proud to. Anna Eskamani is a bold and unapologetic fighter for Florida families and everyday people. She's born and raised in Orlando. She's the daughter of working class immigrants who came to Florida from Iran in search of the American dream. Anna went to Orange County Public Schools and then to the University of Central Florida. She earned dual degrees as an undergrad and a graduate student, worked as a nonprofit professional, and is now getting her PhD in public affairs. She's a bridge builder. She flipped her Florida House Representative legislative seat from Republican to Democrat in 2018, and she won by her reelection by an overwhelming majority in 2020. She made history as the first Iranian American elected to any public office in Florida, and has championed critical issues like economic justice, environmental protection, equality for all, funding for public schools, human trafficking, and sexual assault prevention, and the support of arts and culture funding. With a track record of kind sacrifice, endless hard work, and ironclad values, Anna is known across the state as a leader who is unbothered, unbossed, and committed to the people of Florida. So for more, you could go to annaforflorida.com and read the rest of her resume. Welcome, Anna. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, Tom, for having me, and to Jean as well. We had a great conversation before the event started. And of course, to everyone who's here, I'm so humbled to share space with you, and thank you for your incredible service, both in your military experiences, but even today, the fact that you continue to mobilize and organize and advocate for common sense and center our policy discussions on the needs of everyday people, that is another act of service. And so thank you so much for being leaders in that world and for inviting me to be a part of it. And so, as it was said, my name is Anna Eskamani, and I come from very humble beginnings and proud to serve as a state house representative for District 47. For those who don't know, that is over in the Orlando, Orange County area. My district includes the city of Orlando, Winter Park, Belle Isle, Edgewood, and my new district will include Edenville and Maitland after the legislative maps were redrawn. And I know there are some familiar folks in the room, but also new people. So I wanted to give just a quick background to how I came into politics, because as I mentioned, it was very humble and not something I thought I would ever do. I really ran for office out of urgency, candidly, but I grew up in a working class family as a first generation daughter of immigrants. As was noted, my parents actually came from Iran, came to the United States in search of the American dream at different parts of their lives. They met actually in Orlando, working at the same donut shop. And my mom recognized my dad's accent and asked where his origin was. And he said, Iran. They started speaking Persian, and the rest was history. And so I have a twin sister as well, who's also a badass involved in politics, and a big brother named Arya. And we grew up doing everything we could to really live up to the legacy that my family had sacrificed to help us build. I mean, my parents worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. My dad went to UCF himself in 1994, became an electrical engineer on the weekdays, and worked at Walt Disney World as a customer service representative on the weekends to make ends meet. My mom had a degree from Iran she could not use, so she worked at fast food, minimum wage jobs, eventually at Kmart, if folks remember Kmart. And there were many, many late nights when me and my twin sister would be helping my mom clean the stores. She'd go home in a decent time. And unfortunately, everything in my life took a really dramatic and difficult shift. My mom was diagnosed with cancer, and it was a 4-year battle that she fought very, very bravely. But unfortunately, in 2004, she didn't make it. She passed away. And I was just 13 years old, and it was a very difficult experience. And to this day, is still a weight that I carry and a deep sense of loss that I know I always live with. But in an effort to make that hole feel a lot smaller, my heart has just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And I made a commitment to honor her life through the act of empowering others. And she was such a selfless person that I wanted to live that to infinity. And so everything that I do is very much centered on amplifying the notion of giving without expectation. And so practicing transformational politics, not transactional politics, and leading with values and also leading with fact and trying to find those common sense solutions in the face of many, many crises. And as I got older, I got really involved with on-campus organizing at UCF myself, eventually studying political science and women gender studies, and finding a home in the College Democrats at UCF, but first starting my advocacy with environmental issues and then human rights, and then eventually getting really involved, not just with the Democratic Party locally, but with women's issues and issues that impact girls. And I started volunteering at Planned Parenthood, at my local health center, doing escorting, so walking patients in when there's protesters outside. Began to also do advocacy work around domestic violence prevention, equal work for equal pay, human trafficking prevention, detection, alongside pushing for issues that matter to allow women and families to raise healthy and happy communities. So economic justice is a big focus for me and always has been. Anti-poverty initiatives, mental health access, and of course, volunteering at Planned Parenthood, access to a safe and legal abortion alongside contraception. And when I was about to graduate from UCF in 2012, I was offered a job at Planned Parenthood. I took it and I worked there for 6 years as I went through a master's program, really being in the lion's den when it comes to holding the line on reproductive rights and abortion access here in Florida. And it was the 2016 election cycle where I decided to leave my job at Planned Parenthood to run for office as a first-time candidate, flipping a seat from red to blue and keeping it that way in 2020. And so I'm not someone who comes from a political family. I'm not someone who even became a Democrat because of the political elites or icons. I was first registered no party affiliation. And my evolution to register as a Democrat was very much because I got to know the people at my college campus who were registering other students to vote, who were talking about all these issues that we'll dive into tonight. And that's what inspired me to want to not only get more involved, but to help build political power long-term. And it's been a very difficult, challenging experience in Florida because unfortunately, so much of our politics is dominated today by culture wars. Much of it is also reflective of a divisive media cycle where only the most contentious moments are highlighted, and so many of the stories of people who are directly impacted or who are finding solutions get ignored. And so we have to constantly go against the grain at Team Anna in not only fighting for our values in the state legislature, but also delivering the most effective constituent services you will find. And indeed, during the heart of the pandemic, it was our legislative office that provided more than 50,000 Floridians with their unemployment claims. We basically operate our own, DEO. Instead of the Department of Economic Opportunity, it was the Department of Eskamani Opportunity. And we basically just fielded all these calls and provided late night virtual events to help answer people's questions. And to this day, every Friday, I do a virtual Facebook and Instagram live session just to answer people's questions about government services, about policy debates, about the Supreme Court, anything I can do to help build political power, we're there. Because I do believe firmly in the power of collective efficacy and helping everyday people understand that their vote counts, that their opinion matters, and they can't have a say in the direction of our country, but you just have to know constructively where to express your energy. And so we have been continuously on that path and activating more Floridians to get involved. I also launched a voter registration organization last year because I realized that so much of the political commentary operates on a 2-year cycle and nothing's really sustainable or long-term. And I don't think we should lead with party identification when we talk to everyday people. I think we should lead with our values. And as a Floridian and an American, I care about freedom. I care about family. I care about clean air and clean water and having environments sustained, not just for the next generation of kids, but also for all the critters that call Florida home. I care about our national security and the safety of our neighborhoods. I care about the importance of access to healthcare, no matter at what age, from birth to passing. People should not be navigating bankruptcy because they got sick. And growing up in a working class family, the only fights I ever saw my parents have were over money and just rent and the challenges of paying bills on time. And I don't think families should have to have those stressors, especially in the richest country in the world. We should be able to build a society where if you need a hand up, it's there for you. And that you also have consumer protections and renters' rights so that you're not up against a system that was already rigged against you. As a candidate, I do not take money from some of the state's largest corporations. I don't raise money from Florida Power and Light. I don't raise money from Sugar, from Walt Disney World, from private prisons, from Mosaic. And I say that because unfortunately, many Democrats still do, and it impacts how they vote on some of these most essential and critical legislative debates, especially around the environment and around workers' rights and around public education. And so I think it's really important too that we lead with our values and that we operate independent of corporate influence, especially as elected officials. And so much of my work is also around educating folks on just how bad the corporate tax system is and how can we close corporate tax loopholes here in Florida to make sure that we're able to pay for the social services that we need to build a more healthier and vibrant future. And with that said, I want to invite folks to ask questions. No question is a silly question, and I want to see what's on your mind. But I was also asked to kind of speak to a few specific areas. So first of all, just the growth of Christian fascism right now in our country, and especially in Florida. It's incredibly alarming. We had a abortion rights rally this past Monday on Independence Day. And we had hundreds of people turn out in Orlando for that. And there was a small group of 3%ers that followed us everywhere. And they were wearing, tactical gear, and I could assume they were armed, but they were concealed. And it was really, really unsettling, that in a city like Orlando, where we're just exercising peacefully our First Amendment rights, there's this intimidation factor, right? And of course, you also connect that to the number of mass shootings in America, including in our own state. Pulse nightclub is actually in my district. One of the reasons why I ran for office was because of that tragedy and the importance of every person being able to love who they want to love and live life as their authentic selves without fear of persecution and violence and judgment. But it further reinforces for me the importance of calling out extremism when we see it and not placating it. And in fact, the Sarasota Herald Tribune published an op-ed this weekend that was trying to downplay the existence of the Proud Boys. I'm not sure if folks saw that op-ed, but it got a lot of attention because it not only was it trying to deflect how dangerous the Proud Boys are, but the writer is actually married to a member of the Proud Boys. And that was not disclosed in the editorial. And so I think the Sarasota Herald Tribune removed it from their website, and we'll see what else happens in that regard. But we cannot take for granted how extreme and dangerous and misled these positions are and allow it to also intercept our governmental institutions. I mean, the January 6th insurrection was not successful. It does not mean there won't be another attempt to override our election results, especially if we allow those who support the insurrection and those who continue to claim false election results. If we allow them to not only run for office, but win positions of power, I'm very concerned that if in 2024 comes along and Congress looks different and the votes are there to actually override election results, that we will no longer have a functioning democracy. I'm also very concerned by the recent decision by the Supreme Court to pick up a case for next session of decisions that would essentially override federal law on issues like gerrymandering, on issues like voter suppression and voter discrimination. Because again, for decades, we have been on this path of progress to really uphold the values of this country's foundation. And now we're in this period of backlash where people who are very worried about losing power are trying to regress our progress. And whether it's in making it more difficult to vote, whether it's stripping away women and pregnant people of our rights, whether it's demonizing LGBTQ plus people and referring to those as groomers, or as literal as voter subversion, where your vote just doesn't count, where they literally are trying to toss out votes and say that they're not legitimate and they don't count. We're in this really, really pivotal moment in American democracy, where if we sit down right now, we're giving up the future that we all know is possible, because we were almost there. We were almost to that point. Backlash is a natural reaction to our hope becoming a reality. So when we experience backlash, we shouldn't shrink and surrender. We actually need to fight back more, because that means we were getting closer and closer to that true experience of American liberty and democracy for all, not just for some. And with that said, we cannot feel disempowered today. I know there are so many issues, especially most recently where the Supreme Court has rolled us back. Climate change hasn't got as much attention, but one of the SCOTUS decisions was around the EPA not being able to regulate carbon neutral goals or pollution reduction goals. And that's a devastating decision. And it also begs the question of, why do federal agencies even exist if they can't regulate, right? But at the same time, we have to remember that the public opinion is on our side on these common sense issues. The public wants us to have a more sustainable energy grid and to move off fossil fuels. And when you especially talk to everyday voters about how that would not only be a major job creator, but would help us navigate volatile oil prices and also, of course, serve as a national security interest, then more voters agree with us on these issues. The same with reproductive rights. Majority of Americans and Floridians believe that abortion should remain safe and legal. But we're in this situation where those who are elected to serve, whether it's due to gerrymandering, voter suppression, or corporate resources, so they have more dollars to compete and defeat common sense opponents, the electorate is not reflected by those who are elected. And that's not going to change if we feel disenchanted and disempowered and we don't get involved. It's not going to change if we don't use our voice. And one of the states I admire the most has been Georgia and Texas. Believe it or not, Texas has a potential to be democratic in the future, not just due to the fact of organizing on the ground, but Generation Z is becoming a voting age, and they're helping to change the electorate, the makeup of the electorate. Georgia, as another example, has 2 Democratic senators right now and potentially could have a Democratic governor. And that didn't happen by chance. That was 10 years of consistent persistence and on-the-ground organizing and power building. And that's what we're trying to replicate with Team Anna and with my Voter Reg organization here in the Sunshine State, because we can't just operate on a 2-year cycle. We have to think long-term. And the reality is that those who oppose us have been doing just that. I mean, the fight to overturn Roe was 50 years in the making, did not happen overnight. And it was this consistent, well-funded operation to get to that point. And there is no easy fix for us to get it back. But if we're committed today and maintain that level of engagement consistently over time, I'm very confident that my children and their children will have a much better world to live in a much more freer and democratic America to call home. And that is why I do this work, because there are folks who don't even know who we are right now, and folks who aren't even here yet that are counting on us to not give up and are counting us to stay focused and to uphold these values that I know make me proud to be an American and proud that my parents call America home. And I want to make sure that the next generation can say the same. And so with that, thank you again so much for having me. I look forward to any of your questions or feedback or thoughts. And again, appreciate the opportunity to share space.
Hi, Anna. Thank you very much for your great presentation. And I'll be reading a couple of questions. The first we have is from Bill Maturo, and he says, looking to 2024, do you think that Pence is a lesser evil than Trump or DeSantis?
Ooh, really great question. I mean, I think when it comes to the future American democracy, Pence is like your traditional conservative, right? Still dangerous for a lot of reasons, but not to the point of like overturning election results. And I think what is to our favor is a very intensive, Republican debate, primary debate. So we can also allow DeSantis to be punched around, and hopefully he won't make it through. But, I also shy away from, defining him as a lesser evil because, he was the governor of Indiana, and as the governor of Indiana, worked to ban abortion, has had very poor health outcomes because they won't talk about things like STIs and other types of public health issues. He is very pro-voucher. He's been decimating public education with the expansion of for-profit vouchers, which have no accountability and actually, often fund faith-based schools. So it's mudding up that division of church and state. So I would be careful about, seeing him as a lesser evil because he's dangerous in different ways. I should say that. But I think for the security of democracy, if Pence is the Republican candidate for president and he doesn't win, I don't see him trying to override elections for sure. And that's a positive. But of course, my focus is on making sure that none of those goons become president and trying to hold the line in that regard.
Thank you. The next question's from Jim German, and he says, what are your thoughts on Trump announcing his presidential run and DOJ then indicts him? Claim it is purely political. Why delay?
Why delay? I love this question. I mean, yeah, Trump running for president again is going to set up such an interesting dynamic between him and DeSantis. And remember, DeSantis would not be governor if it wasn't for Trump, right? So DeSantis had a primary with, at the time, the Agriculture and Consumer Services Commissioner, Adam Putnam. And Adam Putnam was in Florida politics since he was a baby. I mean, he really was that the assumed Republican gubernatorial candidate. And then everything changed when Trump endorsed DeSantis. So DeSantis owes Trump a lot. So the fact that, we're potentially going to have a primary with them against each other, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that unfolds. But when it comes to, DOJ, I really wish they move a lot faster. I'm also waiting for updates on Congressman Matt Gaetz. I mean, this is a guy that has been accused of sex crimes and, traveling internationally I believe internationally with minors. Joel Greenberg, one of his friends, is still sitting in an Orange County jail right now. And his sentencing has been delayed again because apparently he is working with federal prosecutors. And so I'm a little frustrated by what seems like, a sluggish process at DOJ and other federal agencies. But I can also only hope that the reason why is they're trying to build really strong cases that are going to be successful. And so we'll see what happens. But yeah, I find it, again, it's just hard. It's wild that he was ever president, and we cannot go back in time. We cannot allow that to happen again.
Thank you, Representative Eskamani. I have a question. I'll take my prerogative. And today I read an article making a parallel between what happened with prohibition, some of the same types of elements starting back in the 1860s, lobbied for many years to prohibit the sale and use of alcohol. And they finally passed an amendment, I think it was the 18th. And then there was a big backlash, and it was hard to enforce this prohibition, and eventually it was overturned. Basically, while it's not exactly analogous, it could give one some hope. I'd like you to comment on that.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that question. I mean, there absolutely is a backlash to banning abortion. And as we speak tonight, there are 16 states in America that have already banned abortion. A handful of them have court injunctions, but most have banned abortion completely. And you have 3 that are imminent and 3 that are pending. And then you have Florida, which has a 15-week abortion ban with no exceptions for rape, incest, or human trafficking, that is currently in court. And though a judge ruled it unconstitutional last week, the state of Florida appealed that decision. So now that ban is in place, and we're trying to get the injunction added back. And meanwhile, we are already seeing patients travel from Texas to Tallahassee and Jacksonville, where there are abortion clinics available, arriving without appointments, just in desperation. And it's going to get a lot worse. And that's the healthcare experience, right? But I think what's really important to remember when it comes to abortion access is that, and I'll be really candid with y'all, majority of American voters are not directly impacted, right? Because the majority of voters are not of reproductive age and don't have a uterus, candidly. So that's a very important universe of voters, but it's not every voter's experience, right? So when we talk about abortion access, we have to make sure people understand that even if you don't feel like you're directly impacted because you cannot give birth or you're no longer going to give birth, it doesn't mean you're not impacted. Right. And so that's why when I talk about abortion access, I often frame it not just as a personal medical decision between that person, her family, her doctor, her faith, and not politicians, but I also talk about it as a freedom, as a self-determination, as the ability to have options, and how that connects to every other person's experience of freedom and liberty. And of course, if one right can be taken away, every right is at risk. And I think that's a very important framing for us to use as well. And just based on recent polling, it does seem like majority of Americans are very concerned about the abortion ban. I was tabling at our 4th of July celebration in my community on July 3rd for their fireworks celebration, and met this young man who moved to Florida from New Jersey, I believe. And he's a man of color, young guy. He says he's religious, but he also felt like it was wrong to take away someone's right. And so I think it's also really important for us to, use language and tell stories that are relatable for folks who might not necessarily ever find themselves in a situation where they might need to end a pregnancy or make that decision about a pregnancy, in order to really secure the type of backlash you're talking about. Because again, with prohibition, everyone was impacted, right? And I think my concern is that with abortion access, because many Americans are not necessarily directly impacted, we have to help them understand how it still does touch their lives. And of course, I find a lot of hope in the fact that many men who are married, who have daughters, who have granddaughters, are concerned. In fact, I was at AFL-CIO for their convening in Orlando a few weeks ago, and I spoke during the general meeting space, and afterwards was talking to some of the workers, and this big union guy comes up to me and tells me how his daughter, his 19-year-old daughter, came up to him crying with her phone in her hand, showing him the SCOTUS update, and just how that impacted him to see his 19-year-old daughter in tears because of that decision. And I can only imagine there's many other men like that who maybe are not directly impacted, but have very similar stories to their children and grandchildren and their sisters and their wives and their cousins and the people in their lives, experiencing that pain and being impacted by this. And the other point I want to make on this, and I know I'm running out of time, but we have to also ask ourselves, how is an abortion ban operationalized? And how insidious and invasive would that be? Because remember, there is no way to completely ban abortion unless you are criminalizing people who end their own pregnancies. And the reality is that times have changed. Ending your own pregnancy is not as dangerous as it once was. We have the abortion pill, which is very safe and very effective, and can be taken typically up to 11 weeks of gestation, if not a little bit after. And right now in Florida, you have to go into a medical facility to access the abortion pill. It is required. But in other efforts by the FDA, they're trying to allow the abortion pill to be mailed to you. So if you can imagine, in states where abortion is banned, folks are going to order pills by mail, and end their own abortion in the privacy of their own home. They'll do it safely. Is government going to check their mail or look in their trash can and make them pee on a stick outside to see if they're pregnant or not? I mean, like, we have to ask these questions. They're a little silly when you think about it, but they're actually really scary and unfortunately have the potential to become real, because there is no way you enforce or prosecute an abortion ban unless you have evidence to say this person ended their pregnancy. And that also includes data privacy issues, using location data to decipher where someone went and where they might have ended their pregnancy. I mean, all of this is on the line. And so again, the right to privacy, I like to think, is also something that people really care about. And in fact, in Florida in 1980 approved a right to privacy ballot amendment that is still in our state constitution today, that the voters approved to protect in 2012 and have maintained their support since then. And that is what is potentially stopping Florida's abortion ban. It's yet to be determined by our more conservative state Supreme Court if they will uphold that privacy to expand towards abortion. But that is the current interpretation of Florida's right to privacy, is that it does protect abortion access. And again, that's not because a bunch of judges agreed. It's because Florida voters have agreed. And that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Thank you. We have, I know time is running short, but we have two more questions.
Sure, I'll take them.
Great. The first is from Mark Gillum. He wants to know, do you think the Supreme Court should be expanded?
Oh, I mean, I think everything should be on the table right now. And this court does not reflect. First of all, I think the justices that lied need to be held accountable. The justices who explicitly stated that they would allow settled law to stay, which includes Kavanaugh, should absolutely be investigated. And I think today, Congressman Ted Lieu and others submitted a letter to do so. And that needs to be taken seriously, 100%. When it comes to expanding the court, I feel like we should, because the country has grown substantially since the court's formation. And the court is one of the most dark and untransparent institutions we have in government today. And it does not reflect the diversity of our nation. And so I think there's many, many good reasons to give the opportunity to expand the court. Of course, I'm a state house representative. I'm not a member of Congress, so I don't have voting power in that. But what I will say as a reminder is Florida State Supreme Court is very different. So Florida State Supreme Court have 6-year terms. So every 6 years, Florida voters actually vote to retain or remove our state justices. And this year, 5 of our justices are on the ballot. And so Florida voters have the opportunity this November to not only elect a new governor, but to actually change the entire landscape of the Florida State Supreme Court. Now, of course, if DeSantis wins again and the justices were not retained, he would still get to reappoint new ones. But the risk you're taking is that we elect a new governor and we also deliver them a new court where they could appoint, because the governors who appoints the justices, and right now, Governor DeSantis has already appointed 3 justices with a 4th one about to be appointed. And so there's only 1 justice right now that is the lone dissenter. Everyone else is super, super conservative. So, just a reminder that to bring our politics local as well, because some things might feel out of our hands right now, but at a local level, there's a lot of good we can do in helping to educate voters on the judicial races, doing research on who's a Federalist Society member is really important. And, trying to amplify that. And in fact, we just did a social media posting on my main outlet and my Pew Power for Florida outlet focused on the judicial races. And I did a Twitter thread as well. And all that's gotten thousands of engagements. And so people are also hungry for this information, and we're going to give it to them.
Thank you very much. Finally, we have a question from Mike Constantino, and he says, it's been suggested to move abortion services to Indian-owned lands due to their sovereignty. Does this sovereignty extend to Indian purchased land?
Yeah, really great question. So some of the, and I see a question in the chat here that I'll grab if that's okay too afterwards.
Sure.
So there's been a lot of great commentary on not just indigenous lands, but also federal land. So like, for example, providing abortion services at the VA and things like that. And that hypothetically would supersede state laws because it's federal. Unfortunately, based on conversations I've had with the White House and with different attorneys, that's not necessarily a guarantee. So a prosecutor could still prosecute you, even if you end your pregnancy on federal land and even indigenous land, or they could pull you over as you're approaching indigenous land and ask you why you're going to, this location and try to interrogate you and potentially find reasons to prosecute you that you were going to end your pregnancy. And so we have to be very thoughtful in any type of advocacy, especially with reproductive rights, to never unintentionally cause harm. And so I have not been, promoting those options as aggressively myself because there's no guarantee that they're safe. And even if you have a prosecutor who says they will not prosecute, because, for example, Andrew Warren, who's the state attorney over in the Tampa Bay area, has already signed a pledge saying he will not prosecute anyone who ends their own pregnancy and so forth. And I think a few dozen prosecutors around the country signed on to this pledge. The problem is that if a new prosecutor comes in, they could retroactively charge people. And so that's scary, right? For patients who might feel safe now, but 2-3 years won't be. But Governor Ron DeSantis has the power to remove cases from your jurisdiction. And that actually happened in Orlando this was under Rick Scott. So it was like 2016. Our new attorney general made the decision that she would not prosecute capital punishment cases. Actually, I think this was 2017. And so she made the decision that she would not pursue the death penalty, right? Which is a decision I support, but it was something that Rick Scott didn't like. And so he literally pulled capital punishment cases out of her district, out of her circuit, I should say, and put it in a different circuit. So the concern too, even when prosecutors say, I'm not going to prosecute abortion cases, if someone is arrested and is in that circuit, DeSantis or whoever the governor is could potentially just remove you and put you in a different circuit and still prosecute you. So at this point, I cannot say with confidence that these ideas around indigenous lands and federal land are necessarily going to be the safest options. Now, there was a story today about a woman, a professor in California, who is raising money to operate abortion by sea. So to basically like pick up patients, in Texas and go to international waters and then come back. Actually, not a unfamiliar concept. There's a really good documentary from 2014 called Women on the Wave that tells the story of a Dutch doctor from the 90s and early 2000s who did this across parts of Africa and South America. But of course, the fact that we even have to think about this is ridiculous. And I do think that one of the organizations that has not gotten as much attention, but is really important, is called Plancypills.org. And so this is an organization that helps to promote, as I mentioned earlier, ordering abortion pills safely online. And they also work with an organization called If, When, How, who provides free legal support. They have a reproductive legal helpline. So if you're trying to figure out what my legal options are in my state, this is a volunteer-driven hotline that's managed by attorneys and things like that. So we have a lot of this infrastructure that's already been built and has been waiting for this moment, because even though the Biden administration has been a little slow to respond, those of us on the ground have not been. Like, we have been waiting for this and preparing for this for a long time. It's still devastating, and we have patients who are really suffering right now. But I also want y'all to know that for those of us in the abortion rights work, like we were not caught off guard. Like, we expected this, and we have been building infrastructure for a long time to respond. It's not enough, which is why we need federal resources. But one of the reasons why the Biden administration has their hands tied is because of policies like the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits any federal funding from going towards abortion. So even when these ideas come up around, well, can the government help with transportation? Can the government help, with all these other like financial tools? The Hyde Amendment potentially prohibits them from doing that. Now, I pushed the administration on, don't fund the service, fund the transportation, trying to find these loopholes. I know they're exploring everything, but, the reality is that there are some really archaic policies that Democrats should have got rid of a long time ago and didn't, that we're still stuck with, that are making this harder than it needed to be. And so, we're doing everything we can on the ground, but it's also looking towards the nonprofit community, the activist community, who also have been providing these additional tools and resources for folks to be able to access an abortion, even if it's not in the traditional clinical sense. And of course, abortion funds are also very important. These are nonprofits that raise money to help those, not just with the cost of the procedure, but with things like travel, hotel stays, childcare, and so forth. And we're all hands on deck. I actually hosted a health center escort training with my office last week. We trained 100 people to do health center escorting. When I worked at Planned Parenthood, I was at the Southwest and Central Florida affiliate. So I used to work in Sarasota once a week at the Planned Parenthood Health Center in downtown Sarasota. And they get really, really bad protesters there. And so, finding ways to help, I think, is really, really important. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And so with that said, I want to just grab this question from the chat if I can, from Vicky.
Sure.
So Vicky writes, at a time when we need a qualified public health director, we have Lopato, who is unqualified and is even teaching Florida medical students, which is very scary, and getting a salary close to $500,000 for negligence. How do we get him out? We hear no disease prevention regarding all these recent health issues as well, which I totally agree with you. Actually, myself and Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith here in Central Florida have to do our own public health announcements because we can't trust the DeSantis administration. And it's not even just with the vaccine, but it's also recently his communications director made fun of long COVID, which is like a legitimate health issue that we are still trying to understand. And literally, they just make a mockery of it. I mean, it's so frustrating. But the quick answer to your question is the best way to get rid of him is to get a new governor, because he is appointed by the governor. And at this point, he's not only been empowered, he's running advertisements. Like when I was in Tallahassee for legislative session, I literally saw like a Department of Health commercial. I think it was focused on eating better, something very generic like that. And hits his face. Like he's like advertising himself. Like so many of Florida Republican officials today. And again, I'm being very specific in my criticism because by no means am I referencing the everyday Florida voter. Like I'm specifically referencing Republican leaders today in Florida. So many of them are huge grifters. Like they constantly, market themselves as being small government, and yet they use government money for their salary, for their contracts, like for their retirement. Like it's so frustrating. And the reality is that once they're in one agency, they tend to also bounce around to other agencies. Like we have so many state officials that were former politicians and or recycled agency heads. And right now, DeSantis has allowed multiple agencies to be politicized and weaponized. So, there's agency heads that are trolling Democrats on Twitter. And it's so disappointing because, back when I was working at Planned Parenthood, state agencies were supposed to be apolitical and just deliver good government services, not be political microphones. And so that's a very unhealthy change because, again, if you're the Department of Business and Professional Regulations, your entire responsibility should be licensing and helping small businesses, pass their different inspections, right? You're not supposed to be perpetuating mask myths. And that's exactly what DPR was doing, and that's seen in multiple other agencies. So anyways, very frustrating, but I think the best path forward is to absolutely work to elect a new governor.
Thank you very much, Representative Eskamani.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. I appreciate y'all. Thank you for your awesome questions. Like I just get so much hope from the fact that that y'all are so engaged and plugged in and like keeping up with the news. And I know Cheyenne from my team put this in the chat, but we have a volunteer newsletter that goes out every Sunday that also includes news clippings and like virtual events. And then we also have our legislative updates when we're back in Tallahassee, and those links are in the chat. But if you go to annaforflorida.com, you can see all those links to sign up. And if you're on social media, you can find us Anna for Florida with 2 N's, all spelled out, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all those places. And I hope I get to join you all in person one day as well. And yeah, much love. And I think I saw Stephen Murphy in the chat too. So great to see you, Stephen. I appreciate all of y'all and wish you a happy and healthy night. And yes, please keep in touch. We appreciate y'all. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Anna.